We are here for the 8th edition of the MasterCLaaS lecture series, guided by our motto, Building Ports, Building Competencies. This platform has been a beacon for visionary ideas, and today shall be no exception. We are fortunate to have two eminent speakers to guide us on today's MasterCLaaS lecture on building land border connectivity and infrastructure. Dr. Constantino Xavier, Senior Fellow at the Center for Social and Economic Progress, heads the Sambandh Initiative on Regional Connectivity and serves as a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. With academic credentials from Jawaharlal Nehru University and Johns Hopkins, his extensive work on India's role in South Asia, covering security, connectivity, and governance, is widely recognized. Joining him is Ms. Riya Sinha, Associate Fellow at CSEP, a 2024 Maitri Fellow at the United States Study Center, has exemplary expertise in trade, logistics, and border management. Together, they bring a wealth of knowledge to illuminate our path. I now invite Shri Jain Singh Sir, Chairman LPAI, to set the context for today's MasterCLaaS. His words has always set a purposeful tone.
I hope you mean it when you say that. Thank you and warm welcome. I want to add my warm words of welcome to Riya and to Tino. Thanks for agreeing to be in this session, and I just hope all our ICP managers there who joined us online and our guests from MEA will be listen to you keenly. And I wanted this talk to be very, very candid, so don't sugarcoat. I mean, the whole idea behind calling people from academy and think tank is to have a very unbiased kind of an appraisal and also the policy advice. Fortunately or unfortunately, land port, I mean, our connectivities across is riddled with the fact that we have a typically, the structure of what Max Weber called the stovepipe bureaucracy. So we are yet to have the kind of harmonization and the kind of fusion and synergy as the Prime Minister would like to happen. So that's the reason, in fact, I wanted the officers from BM division to actually attend, because we unfortunately look at our borders, our land ports from the prism of security, whereas we should see it more as the avenues for furthering trade and progress, and they can actually proceed hand in hand. They are not very mutually exclusive. One is, of course, the issue of interdepartmental, interministerial, and international coordination. That's the bad news, but the good news is that there are many low-hanging fruits here, which I have discovered lately in my 1 month that I have spent here. Looking at the border, that there is a lot of cross-border trade, which is basically very, very subsistence kind of trade, but that has potential. Why? Because this South Asian region is one of the fastest growing regions in terms of GDP growth across the world, and demography is there, so there'll always be demand. Of course, a lot of considerations that drive even local trade are politico-economic. But that said, there is a lot that can happen, that can be done, that should be done. So the best people I thought to speak on this are Tino and Riya. They work very extensively in this field and work on the ground. So it's not that a lot of it is secondary research, a lot of it is primary research, and people are outside from different walks of life. So even I'm very eagerly looking forward to this. And as I said in the beginning, although this is broadcast, telecast, blah, 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 live, recorded and everything, but it should be a very no holds barred kind of an appraisal. So with that, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Dr. Xavier and Ms. Sinha for the lecture. So, the pointer is also from there. Wherever you are comfortable.
What is it here?
Is this one?
Yeah, there is.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. Maheshji, thank you for the kind introduction. Always good to see you comparing and bringing these things together. Jayanji, thank you for the invitation. It means a lot for us to be able to share the work we'll be doing. Let me say two things about this place that you are running and leading now, Jayanji. The first things I tell this not only because you are all here and we're here today, and I'm good to see you also again, but I say this everywhere. This, the Land Ports Authority of India, and this building, and you all, is one of the most interesting places. I remember when I spoke at the 10th Foundation Day of this authority with Honorable Home Minister in 2022, that he referred to arteries of connectivity, corridors of connectivity. He saw the ICPs, which you are in the process of expanding, upgrading, developing, empowering, as little nodes that are larger, elements of a larger plan to connect India to VIII 2047 as arteries of growth between India and the rest of the world. That little ICP, they are quite big actually, we've seen some of them, is one point of a larger plan and corridor that will connect India's developmental ambitions and growth and security too, but growth with the rest of the world. So that's the grand vision. And that's why this place is such an exciting place. And the second point, Xavier, it's wonderful to see you here. Congratulations again. Because you've been a believer in our work, in our research. But frankly, it's not a coincidence that you are leading this institution. Because you yourself come from so many angles of this. You were in waterways. You were the National Security Council Secretary. You had your academic stint in London, right, at the LSE. You've worked across the board on these issues from different levels, and that's very important. This is not just an economic issue. This is a neighborhood issue. This is a national development priority. This is a logistics issue. It's an infrastructure issue. It's also a security issue. It's a mobility issue for people. It's a flow of capital. If you're talking about land border management and ICPs, it's a complex issue and requires many different people from different perspectives, different angles to make sure that the vision set by Home Minister at that point, I assume that guides this, is realized sooner, as soon as possible. So with that, what we'll do today is we'll share the work that we do in our not-for-profit research institute, think tank Center for Social and Economic Progress, in two parts. I'll start with the first part, which put this in context a little bit, of why we think that border connectivity is critical and why India has many options to upgrade border connectivity infrastructure and why it is very important to do that over the next few years. And then some solutions also of how to do it. That's what we'll share with you today. Some of our work, you can check on our website a variety of publications. Riya's paper of 2021 is particularly important on integrated checkposts. But this is also not only about the ICPs, this is about the entire architecture, the entire environment that regulates connectivity. Right? It's also about border states, for example, it's about local stakeholders, etc. That's at least the mission you've imbued. Open this up a little bit. Can we slide? I'll move here, right? Good. So after a brief introduction, we'll look at the past and why there are missing land bridges, we call them. We speak a lot about bridges across lakes, seas, rivers, etc. But these are all land bridges, inland land bridges. Land to land, not land to sea, sea to land, sea to sea. This is land bridges which are inland of the region. There are many problems why these land bridges have been neglected for decades. There are still causes that are delaying progress on land bridges, transportation and trade. These years have very big, costly effects for India's developmental agenda. And we argue there's been a big focus for the last 10 to 20 years on the maritime connectivity. Ports, sea lines of communication, etc. But you can only develop if the sea maritime connectivity angle is brought through multimodal connectivity inland. Right? The connectivity logic cannot stop at a port. You need to have multimodal connectivity from railways, roads that connect within India and across borders. Say, for example, Matabari in Bangladesh is becoming a deep sea port in Bangladesh. It will create trade through within Bangladesh. It will also create trade from Bangladesh towards northeast India and the rest of India and towards third countries, Bhutan and Nepal. Right? So those land bridges need to support the maritime connectivity. And after 10 to 20 years of focus on maritime connectivity, we say that now we need to focus on the neglected inland land bridges and corridors, for which the ICPs are, again, nodes, critical nodes of transmission on the borders. And then Riya will speak about 4 and 5, what the initiatives are, the potential, the challenges, and the regulatory policy instruments to ensure that we accelerate this initiative. And when we speak about land bridges, look at the map here. We're talking about this region. Okay? We're not looking at the littoral of the Bay of Bengal, which is now being developed in many, many ports and corridors. We're looking at the inland area, the BBIN, the northeast region, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh. One day things improve, maybe Myanmar, things are very difficult there, but ideally we'll have one railway connection to Bangkok, maybe to Guwahati one day. That's the dream we need to realize, right? Today, if you want to take a train from Europe to Southeast Asia, you can actually. You can take a train through many connections between Lisbon, Portugal, and Singapore. But that train line goes like this, okay? All the way to Europe, through Central Asia. Ideally, if we connect the missing link also of railways here one day between Myanmar and India, which is the only missing link between Mandalay basically and Manipur, then we will have finally an integrated railway line that connects that land bridge around the Bay of Bengal. So briefly, we surveyed what India can do on connectivity and the imbalance between maritime and continental connectivity. We look at the gaps and we suggest policy instruments. India's current approach has been focused, as I mentioned, largely on maritime connectivity, port infrastructure development, maritime shipping agreements, naval security exercises, information sharing, blue economy. There's been much less focus on the multimodal inland land connectivity dimension. And that remains weak, but it is critical, imperative, urgent for India's development purposes. For example, in the words of the current Honorable External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, at the Indian Ocean Conference in 2024, he said, "Let me highlight the need for lateral land-based connectivity across the Indian Ocean region." He's speaking of the Australians at that point, at the Indian Ocean Conference. It's all about shipping, ports, and he's cautioning and saying, let us also look at the lateral land-based connectivity that complements and supplements the maritime connectivity flows. So that means we need to correct the limited transportation and infrastructure linkages between India's northeast region, Bangladesh and Myanmar, for example, also Nepal and Bhutan. And therefore, these gaps that are there need to be corrected. They're hindering the growth potential of this sub-region. This, as I mentioned, is required because there's been a lot of focus on the maritime dimension. Former National Security Advisor, Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, for example, said that now maybe India is overcompensating for its past neglect of maritime issues. So from neglecting the maritime, we're doing the opposite now. You're overcompensating, doing too much maritime. Maybe you need to look inwards a little bit, inland towards your neighbors within the subcontinent. To give you a few examples of how India has done this overcompensation, if we go with that term, it has developed the Sagar initiative, the Sagar Mala initiative. Riya just told me the new Sagar Mala, which is announced, the new version now. 4 of the 7 pillars of the Indo-Pacific Oceans initiative are all on maritime issues. There's been many MOUs on port connectivity with Thailand and other neighboring countries in Southeast Asia. There are agreements for new ports in Andaman Nicobar, in Indonesia. There's an MOU now between Chattogram and Ranong ports. Also beyond India, there's a lot of focus on maritime shipping in the Bay of Bengal and Andaman seas. The ADB and other multilaterals have focused a lot on India's eastern seaboard in terms of developing the ports there. The Sitra port in Myanmar has been developed as part of India's initiative too. And there's been therefore many initiatives, very good ones. It's not an either or, right? Very important. This is very important. It has been largely achieved, it's still work in progress, but we must complement this much more now by linking this with the inland, land-based bridges connectivity. Problems, for example, therefore challenges, we can see why this is important. The India-Myanmar-Thailand highway has been delayed over 20 years, just building a simple road connecting these 3 countries. Railway links between India and Myanmar are still a dream. Riya, you had written a larger paper, a smaller paper also on this one, particularly India-Myanmar plans that go back to the 80s of connecting these two countries through a railway link. The Kaladan multimodal transport project has also faced challenges and remains partially operationalized. A lot of the BIMSTEC master plan on transport and infrastructure logistics initiatives have remained on paper, not being implemented because of these issues inland. The BBIN motor vehicle agreement, as you all know, has also faced headwinds and remains partially at all implemented, only bits and pieces. And again, China has been doing a lot, just as a contrast with Myanmar, in the China-Myanmar economic corridor. If you look at India-Myanmar economic corridor, that's still a dream, a long, long distant dream. Give you an example of this. We looked, for example, at what is the land-based share of bilateral trade between different countries and Myanmar. If you think of Myanmar as a critical country that links Southeast Asia and parts of China even, as one of the largest economies in the world. If you look at China, for example, 40 to 50% of China-Myanmar trade is via land. So half of their trade between China and Myanmar is between land. Thailand, 70 to 90% of Thailand-Myanmar trade is over land, not air or sea. Bangladesh, 20 to 40% of Bangladesh-Myanmar trade in those years was land-based. India's share of land-based trade in Myanmar, you see, has remained neglected. We have those figures down to 1%. This is formal trade, of course. We know about the informal trade. But if you assume that the logic is one of formalizing trade, of all economies doing this, we need to bring these numbers up. There are many causes for this: historical barriers, partitions, protectionism, decades of economic introversion against trade. Janji, you mentioned the security focus, a lot of focus on security instruments, barriers, fences, hindering roads, hindering trade and mobility, which had its logic and was important. Connectivity gaps in terms of infrastructure, and larger path dependency in terms of insularity of the last 70 years. These are the causes. There remain some of them, they're not all gone, and we have to make sure that we overcome these and many ways correct the gaps of the result of these gaps. The costs are huge. Networked approach means we need now, beyond a hub and spoke model, to deepen cross-border linkages between India and its neighboring countries. There are huge economic gains. For example, India's export potential grew up by 30% if you develop some of this basic connectivity. The global best practices are there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you look at the US-Mexico border, if you look at the Singapore-Malaysia border, there are advanced smart border, smart infrastructure that today regulates connectivity. And this is very important for those geo-economic transformation and developmental objectives. The imbalanced response, I think I hope I've explained well enough to you in the past, but just to recap, there's been a huge maritime focus to address the past sea blindness. The maritime focus is important, but now what we need to do much more of, and we mentioned Japan here for example, is that many other countries are willing to support India's connectivity initiatives inland. Today, Japan is today a very important player in the northeast region of India. It is interested to finance, support India's land-based connectivity initiatives. There's a huge infrastructure push through various multilateral initiatives, whether the SASEC or the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. But above all of this has been tending towards a maritime focus and needs to be complemented with land connectivity. This matters because it is a clear political imperative today. I mentioned Home Minister's statement in 22 because he set that political agenda for 2047, which has a developmental driver behind it. It has an economic driver. If you want to grow and trade with the rest of the world, you need to connect with your neighbors. If you connect with your neighbors, you will be able to leverage the benefits of trade. If there was better infrastructure that would allow for more Southeast Asia trade, including through India's ICPs sometimes with other countries, the GDP boost could be of 10% for some of these countries in the region. Value chains are very important today in the region between South and Southeast Asia. And of course, there's increasing competition and logic of competition with China, which is doing a lot in the region and must also be taken into consideration. So with that, over to you, Riya, to walk us through, I think, some of the potential challenges and ideas of how we can now make this true and accelerate this agenda of the next 10 to 20 years?
Thank you, Tino. One thing that we do in our research is also identify what are the harder areas of intervention, the physical infrastructure connectivity linkages, what are the challenges in those areas, but also complementing them with the softer areas of interventions because having been on the field, interacted in Delhi, it's very clear that both areas go hand in hand, and there was a critical World Bank study a couple of years ago that did mention that even though you may have physical infrastructure, 70% of cross-border trade costs and time of doing trade really depend on the level of facilitation of the softer engagements you have between cross-border engagements. So starting with the hard infrastructure interventions first, road connectivity, of course, is the most, for this BBIN region, for the Bay of Bengal region, it is one of the most important areas of intervention because approximately 70% of regional movement takes place via road, and that's why ICPs also play, the land ports also play a very important role. But we do face different challenges, and I'm sure many of you are aware of this. It's the different levels of infrastructure, whether it is a land port in India or the land port across border. Nepal is a slightly different story with mirror infrastructure in terms of land ports, but when it comes to access infrastructure such as roads, such as railways, then we see significant differences in what is available on the Indian side and across the border. Land acquisition, contractor loans are something that we've come across in our case studies. That we made the project completion time and a lot of project completion hinges on these issues even as it is progressing. And in recent years, there has been a lot of focus from the Indian side on developing the roads bordering China as well. Of course, there is a security, there is a geostrategic rationale for it, but sometimes it also comes at the cost of mobilizing resources from the existing areas when it comes to cross-border infrastructure. And also, another key challenge that exists is that there is no real-time information exchange mechanism available even today, the kind we see, for example, in the European countries. For example, between the Norway-Sweden border, where there is actually less duplication of information exchange. If a scanning is done on Norway side, at the same time it is sent to the Swedish side for facilitated movement. These are some of the challenges in terms of road connectivity that we are currently facing. Rail connectivity, again, this is an area of development. India has made a lot of progress in the last few years. For the first time, we have passenger trains with Nepal. India has revived 6 out of 7 old railway linkages with Bangladesh. The northeast region is being connected with railway. Hopefully, if the situation improves, also extend to Myanmar. Because railways are very important, one rake can carry approximately the cargo of 120 trucks. And this really tells you about the potential. But again, there are challenges in terms of differences in the gauge system, in terms of quality of infrastructure that is available, the transshipment cost because railways do not provide last mile connectivity, and lack of infrastructure facilities for cargo handling. These are the key challenges that continue to exist when it comes to cross-border railway connectivity. Land ports, this is an old figure, 23 ICPs by 2025, but I just saw in Sir's office that this number has been updated in terms of where you want to reach by 2047. But again, land ports on the Indian side, of course, the infrastructure has improved drastically. But again, there's a lack of mirror infrastructure on the Bangladesh side. On other land borders as well. Lack of warehousing space remains a problem at some of the ICPs. These are border areas, of course, there's only so much expansion that can happen. The presence of PJs, approach road is again narrow in many of the critical land ports. And multimodal ICPs are still under development. I know there is one in the northeast, but in terms of, it's not present across the borders of the region. And finally, another area of development and potential is the dry ports or multimodal logistics park. They of course result in a reduction in cost. India has planned 35 multimodal logistics parks, so far only 3 in the northeast region, in the BBIN region. The challenge with these is is that first of all there is a lack of volume itself in the dry ports. There aren't enough dry ports to really engage in cross-border trade. Plus, there is no mutual recognition of dry ports. So, if we see agreements between, say, India and Nepal, India and Bhutan, if you see the list of entry and exit of ports, dry ports are actually not a port of entry or exit to be really used in cross-border trade. So, if a cargo comes from a dry port, it will go to the ICP because ICP is recognized as a port of entry or exit. And this is something that has to be dealt with at a diplomatic level also with the neighboring countries, like which ports do we identify as points of entry or exit. And currently, there's a lack of rail road movement from the existing dry ports. For example, the Siliguri dry port is one of the biggest ones, but there's no rail road movement. There is only road movement currently, and rail movement is actually not recognized for that particular dry port. So these kind of challenges really affect how trade takes place from these different modes for cross-border movement. A couple of interventions, of course. One is that there needs to be infrastructure upgradation on both sides. May or may not happen simultaneously, but there is a need for mirror infrastructure if we are really talking about seamless cross-border trade. Development of dual gauge railway system. This is something that China is doing with in Central Asia. This is something that I heard that India was exploring with Bangladesh. I'm not sure what exactly is the update on it, but this also comes from a field level example. Dr. Xavier and I were in Nepal, and we were and visited the Department of Railways, and we asked, what are the challenges with India in upgrading, say, the Raxaul-Kathmandu railway, for example. And one of the challenges that came up was that India wants to develop a broad gauge railway, whereas as part of the Trans-Asian railway network, Kathmandu would prefer standard gauge railway. So how do we overcome these different technicalities when it comes to cross-border railway development and movement of cargo? And then again, cargo handling infrastructure, particularly for railways, is not available at the stations for movement of cargo. Digital initiatives in terms of customs cooperation, real-time information sharing, regional single window system, which would be the best case scenario, but even to have a system for exchange of real-time information, I think that itself would achieve a lot in streamlining operations and reducing duplication of paperwork and processes at the border areas. Development of more dry ports and multimodal logistics park in India's northeast region to decongest the borders, and like I mentioned before, identifying them as points of entry or exit, and developing land connectivity initiatives in line with other regional connectivity initiatives. This is important not from India's perspective so much, but from the neighboring countries, because they depend on ADB reports, on World Bank reports, and they kind of develop their internal plan based on those. And those plans also incorporate where India can also intervene. So many of the national priority projects, for example, in Nepal or Bangladesh, are based on multilateral reports that have identified several regional connectivity initiatives, and there is a need to find alignment between those. Beyond these hard infrastructure suggestions, there are other policy instruments on the softer side that we also identify in our research. One is, and we were talking about this, that cross-border connectivity, land ports, they require multi-dimensional intervention, which means it's not just the role of the MHA, it is not just the ME, it is not just the security agencies that are responsible for cross-border movement. There has to be a role of states in the form of cooperative federalism. States are the beneficiaries, states are the roots from where these cross-border initiatives take place, but there isn't enough right now in terms of consultations, in terms of workshops, in terms of how states can contribute to further development of this. There have been some conferences happening in Assam and Meghalaya towards this. Advantage Assam recently also addressed the issue of cross-border connectivity, but it has to be done at a more structured level. More interministerial cooperation, I think Gati Shakti initiative, the National Committee on Trade Facilitation, the welcome initiatives to really promote inter-agency, inter-institutional cooperation. Another level of intervention, because we are talking about cross-border, is the important role that the diplomatic presence plays in the valleys. not just through the capitals, not just through the embassies and high commissions, but also very importantly, the consulates in the region play an important role. There is a growing number of consulates in the region from the neighboring countries, and that's where important technical officers need to be stationed who can identify the challenges at the border level, at the ground level, but also communicate that to main missions and the headquarters. Another area of intervention that we have noted is, of course, cross-border connectivity initiative. That's a grand plan, that's a part of neighborhood first, Act East policy. But how can we build infrastructure on the ground when there is no political stability, when there is no guarantee of security? The situation in Manipur is one example. The situation in Bangladesh or in Myanmar, for example, that's also a matter of concern. That how to make connectivity initiatives on the ground happen when there is no security, when there's no security guarantee for the infrastructure, and that sort of and that is a point of reservation for many stakeholders and private sector investments, and therefore there is a need for interagency cooperation to invest in mechanisms of consultation, political and social buy-in. That's where the role of consulates again becomes very important for local level political and social buy-in. Indian state needs to deploy its military, security and diplomatic resources as a sovereign guarantee to encourage private sector investments. If we just look at the case of the Kalagan multimodal transportation project in Myanmar, the impact of domestic conflict has delayed the completion by many years. There were instances of kidnapping, there was just a lot of ground level issues which hindered many private sector participation in completion of them. We still, and apart from CSEP port, we don't see any other part operationalizing as of now. Exploring new regional and international partnerships. As I mentioned before that, from the point of view of the neighboring countries, regional and international partnerships are important. They want India as a player in the region, of course, but they also want more predictability, more guarantees through regional and international partnerships, and this is where India can play because of its economic might, can play a good role in the region. There are different agencies across the world that are very much interested in contributing to connectivity initiatives South Asia, whether it is Thailand, whether it is Japan, Australia, USA. When it restarts, perhaps we will see. But the Mekong Ganga initiative, the ACMEX initiative, all of these are focused on the importance of regional cooperation, have identified several projects, and this is an area where, India can leverage its partnership with these countries to focus on a lot of connectivity projects. BIMSTEC also. And another area is collaborating on regulatory norms and standards, data sharing, harmonization, mutual recognition agreements on testing standards. Everyone talks about harmonization, but basic things such as mutual recognition agreements in specific products category, they did exist briefly between Bangladesh and India, between Bhutan and India, but they're not across products. So perhaps there is a need to look more at the mutual recognition agreements and how they can be a facilitator for a movement of certain category of goods. And finally, private sector engagement for strategic infrastructure, utilizing the concessional finance scheme, promoting participation of private logistics operators. Now, private train operators, for example, can take cargo from Calcutta to Nepal. That provision is not currently available with Bangladesh, for example. That could be an area of intervention, operationalizing the multimodal logistics park, dry ports, and hopefully land ports under the PPP model. Because private sector participation in the development of Sidway port was one case study we looked at, and that was very important because from a larger player like SR to smaller player like A to Z Exim or Bharat Freight were involved and led to the completion, development, and operationalization of Sidway port at that point, which was a challenging context to operate in that sense. So all of these measures collectively, both the harder interventions in terms of physical infrastructure and the softer interventions in terms of policy, norms, standards, private sector participation, interagency cooperation, can collectively improve regional connectivity and infrastructure development across the BBIN and Bay of Bengal region. I'll stop there and happy to answer the questions. Thank you.
We open the session for question and answer session.
Just one. We also request our participants to join in online, even if they have a question, they can do that. You have a chat box in your thing. And of course, I have lots of questions actually, but I would request the audience and just feel free. Feel free to ask any questions that you have, any query that you have, any point you want to make regarding the presentation. Just introduce yourself and shoot.
And with the railway line between Jogbani and Viratnagar, one of the challenges that has been is, apart from what's happening with the coaches, is Nepal. One of the biggest challenges in Nepal is that who is going to operate the trains. And they've been asking India for capacity building, but also sometimes lending railway personnel to Nepal for operating it. But I'm not. Maybe you can provide a more technical answer, sir. But this remains a huge gap because railway capacity in Nepal currently is non-existent. So how is that movement going to take place? That streamlining needs to happen between both.
So before I answer, Ramakant ji, मैं सिर्फ पूछना चाह रहा था जो कार्गो जो expected है containerized या non-containerized, मैं क्या containerized कार्गो ही होगा कॉन्कोर के लोग आए।
Yes.
तो ये नेपाल का import है via India कि नेपाल से इंडिया आने वाला है, किस तरह का कार्गो है?
सर ये इंडिया से नेपाल जाने वाला है, हमारे लिए एक्सपोर्ट है और नेपाल के लिए।
और ये इंडिया में कहाँ से ओरिजिनेट कर रहा है?
सर ओरिजिनेट हो रहा है कोलकाता साइड से सर, कोलकाता और नबीजॉब से सर, दो जगह से।
अगर कोलकाता से कोई नेपाल के लिए कार्गो है जो कंटेनर में जा रहा है, ये इसका बहुत ही सिंपल तरीका है। आपको नेपाल के अंदर रेलवे लाइन नहीं भी हो तो भी जा सकते हैं। उसका तरीका ये है कि कॉनकॉर कैन ब्रिंग इट्स रेक अप टू जोगबनी या नियरेस्ट पॉइंट एट जोगबनी। From there, Concorde का purpose ही multi-modal transport है. So if you have a container handling facility, the container can be offloaded from the railway rake at your premises, and then it can be then transshipped to a trailer in Nepal. क्योंकि it is a multi-modal movement, right? So train से वहाँ यहाँ आपके यहाँ आएगा और यहाँ से वही कंटेनर ट्रेलर पे लग के चला जाएगा। अच्छा, वहाँ के नेपाल के ट्रेलर्स इंडिया में अलाउड है, इंडिया के ट्रेलर भी नेपाल में अलाउड है। कस्टम फॉर्मेलिटी जो है वो यहाँ पे हो जाएगी। इसके लिए कुछ कस्टम क्लियरेंसेस चाहिए होंगी। You have to file the shipping bill here in जोगबनी एंड इसकी परमिशन होनी चाहिए ट्रांजिट की। तो अगर है दिस डेफिनेटली कैन बी एक्सप्लोर्ड। देखिए इसमें चूंकि हमारे लैंड पोर्ट्स में कहीं भी वॉल्यूम्स अवेलेबल नहीं है तो फुल रेक हैंडलिंग फैसिलिटी कहीं भी नहीं होगी और नहीं हमें इसमें अभी एटलीस्ट एट दिस स्टेज एज वी स्पीक खर्चा नहीं करना चाहिए। एक फुल लेंथ साइडिंग डालने की कॉस्ट अगर आपके पास लैंड अवेलेबल है वो भी 20 से 30 करोड़ है, केवल एक स्पर डालने की, केवल एक साइडिंग डालने की कॉस्ट। और अगर इलेक्ट्रिफिकेशन कराएंगे तो 10 करोड़ और बढ़ जाएगा और उसका मेंटेनेंस कॉस्ट भी होगी। तो container movement via Concorde or any other private container operator is the only option that is available, and our land ports are sufficiently well equipped in terms of area। आपको जगह चाहिए केवल कंटेनर हैंडलिंग के लिए। रीच स्टैकर लाके, रीच स्टैकर की भी जरूरत नहीं पड़ेगी, इतना वॉल्यूम नहीं है कि नॉर्मली आपकी एक स्लिंग ट्रेन जो होती है वो एक घंटे में 5 या 6 कंटेनर ही हैंडल कर सकती है, लेकिन उससे ज्यादा आपके पास कार्गो नहीं है। दैट कैन बी हैंडल्ड, दैट इज वन वे। The other is to use what is called a hub and spoke facility. For example, I don't know what the nearest ICD in near Jogbani, but जैसे कलकत्ता में है वहाँ पे कॉनकॉर्ड का माजेरहाट में है और एक दो जगह और जो ICDs है वहाँ से that full rake को आप हब की तरह ट्रीट करें और वहाँ से कंटेनर उठा के ट्रेलर पे लोड करें, and that can come up to Petrapol. I mean, this is the way that worldwide container business operates. So this can be done. आप बस कस्टम से पता कर लीजिए कोई रिस्ट्रिक्शन तो नहीं है इंपोर्ट या एक्सपोर्ट में। द रेस्ट वी कैन फॉलो अप अगर ट्रैफिक है। In fact, I am meeting CMD Concorde tonight, so I can raise that issue.
one of the idea of the multimodal logistics park, right? To focus on the industrial centers, to consolidate the cargo in one place, and then from there you move them to the land route, so that the security angle is also handled and efficiency also comes in when it comes to.
But the MMLPs are located within the hinterland, right? So, for example, if I talk about northeast, I think one MMLP is in Jogi Gofa, which is near Guwahati. But if they are placed right at the border, could land ports and MMLP be, synchronous? Is what essentially my question.
If they're not placed at the land borders, to my knowledge, they can be synchronous, because land borders again they have limited space, right? I mean, how much? Because MMLPs require a very big area. Any special economic zone will require a very big area that you may not find at the border areas, which are very, very congested. I mean, ICP expansion itself is a big challenge when it comes to the border areas. So you have to have them where it makes sense to have where industrial centers can reach easily, and then have that multimodal connectivity option via railway, via roadway to streamline operations.
Can I answer your question? What you are, I think, suggesting is that we need to leverage our ICPs, our land port, as some sort of a hub for economic activity for the region. And this is precisely the reason why these ICPs have come into existence. We are not merely aggregators of service providers. Service providers mean not only aggregators for customs, Bureau of Immigration and the border guarding forces, but also the idea is to, by facilitating trade and transit of passengers, they become some sort of a nucleus. They become some sort of a, like incipient hub for development around the region. That is the whole idea. That is the entire spirit. That is why we are going in for this mindless acquisition. I mean, when I look at 80 acres at Banvasa, it actually looks pretty asinine if you see the current volumes of trade. But the whole idea is to actually expand. And I was just discussing with Tino, and I said, today, why can't we have, diagnostic center and some sort of a OPD medical facility? Because most of our passenger, the tourist visa that we are granting to people from Bangladesh or people coming in from Nepal and Bhutan, many of them are coming to India for medical reasons. So, agar aap kam se kam starting with some OPD type ka facility or a diagnostic center would serve two purposes. You'll be able to serve people living in border areas, especially in borders that are very densely populated. Most of our borders, if you leave aside the LAC, in Indo-Tibet borders, agar aap unko hata dein, most of our borders are very densely populated in the eastern side also. तो वहाँ के residents के लिए भी सुविधा हो जाएगी. At the same time, you can have a similar facility for people who are coming in. They need not travel all the way to Calcutta and subsequently to Delhi. Definitely, it's a good idea, and this is what we are working at. Problem is far too many expectations for an organization that is very, very young, fledgling, still struggling to find its feet, does not even have a permanent cadre. So, of course, definitely it's there on the agenda.
Can I come
Yeah,
in?
please.
Music to my ears on capacity. I think the work we do on many issues, on regional, foreign policy issues, there's such a great ambition and potential, but we need the capacity. And that capacity is a whole of government approach from different angles. But I started by saying many, many more people specialized in different fields and looking at the same issue from different angles. And across silos, across government, ministries, private sector, that's absolutely very important. I think we're on the right track, but needs to do much more to this capacity. And it needs to be a land ports authority thing. It is communicating constantly to different, right? This is one of the most complex policy issues, right? You're speaking to all of government and states and local stakeholders and across the border and subnational across the border and central. So when we're saying that we need a Indian consulate in Virganj, for example, because you also have an embassy in Kathmandu in Nepal, but you also have to have a subnational presence across the border that flies the India flag there and helps often Indian grants that are building the mirror infrastructure. That's the first point of capacity. To your question, it's a yes and no question. A little bit of a difference. See, I think you can have the ICP as nodes of special economic zones and the border region as a hub for industrial, economic activity, etc. But I think what Riya mentioned also, it's not easy to do it always on the border. That's one. And I think since there's nothing on the border, we still have to do that first. So point taken that that is the first emission. But think also of a different one. And there's not a yes and, that's why the yes and no. No is how much can you take away from the border that can be done elsewhere, right? Ideally, there's nothing at the border. I'm sorry to sound revolutionary now, as you are building ICPs, but mark my words, the vision is also one where one day you will have nothing on the border. The truck will, and the train will come, the people will move, and you're monitoring them off-site from Delhi. It's happening already. Riya, you've done some work on this. So both things are happening currently in policy. You're taking away and you're doing the inland container depots that are maybe here, right? Which is the biggest one in Noida now being built, right? The massive project, right? That you will have trade coming through the new Noida airport, for example, going to Nepal and being cleared there, and then the train goes directly to Kathmandu. When look at that vision, that is a vision. So both, I don't know, that's a balance you'll have to strike in that, how much you want to do on the border. But if you go to the most advanced borders in the world today, and as we have technology now, right, we have to play with technology, digital capacities that we did not have 10, 20, 30 years ago. So in Singapore, Malaysia, US, Mexico, Sweden, Norway, maybe still stuck in that old mindset, we have a physical clear and control, so those places have become nodes of economic and industrial development on the border. Today you can leapfrog that. If you're India, Nepal, division. You can leapfrog by using technological and smart borders to monitor things and do things off-site. Right? And there do, what I think we were mentioning, is also aligned with the other countries' interests. So India, as you know now, has had announced over the last few years, several India economic zones in Bangladesh. Now, surely there was some thinking on where you want to place those Indian economic zones in Bangladesh. They have to be aligned again with these ideas of where are you developing the land ports, where are you developing your railway lines, your roads, where's your growth going to happen within the Northeast region. That again may depend on simple things like where's the future of agro-business in the Northeast region. In some states, in what sectors, what is the export potential of agro-business towards Southeast Asian markets. Again, you need to know where the export markets are. So all of these has to be linked, and that's why I'm just a little bit skeptical about big economic zones on the borders. Yes. Well, yes and no. Yeah.
Not really.
Yes and no. Okay. See, let me start with one simple thing. 1 year, 1967, which is when the ASEAN, the old ASEAN comes together. I mean, where was India in 1967? With relation to, I mean, there was still East Pakistan, I would say, other day, Myanmar, Burma. It was fencing, bordering, cutting down on trade for centuries. Insulating, cutting. Where with Thailand? Myanmar was not ASEAN in 67, it's not an early entry. But Thailand opened up. It started trading with the world. 78, China opened up. Maoist communist state opened, started to trade with Southeast Asian markets, which gives them the power and the leverage today. So, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, Southeast Asia was coming together. Myanmar joins ASEAN eventually, starts gravitating there. So that is the explanation that for that figure you see. It's not just infrastructure, of course. And of course, infrastructure. I went recently to Thailand-Myanmar border post, which is some 500 kilometers south of Bangkok. Okay. There's nothing in Myanmar on the other side. In fact, there's no road. But the Thais have built a massive land port.
Exactly.
It's empty. I went there, it's like a museum, it's empty. But the day the Burmese, or whatever, Myanmar opens up its economy, or maybe they develop that southern area. So this is very south. So where that, it's on the isthmus of the Kra, north of the Kra. It's a place called Chumpon on the Thai side. And there's nothing. I can't even say a city, there's nothing on the Myanmar. There's jungle for 200 kilometers to the coast. The Thais have built something, they've done dozens of these. It's not one. Preparing for the next 20, 30 years. In fact, we wrote a piece that was a little bit controversial here. Riya and me, remember? On this, making the case for Pakistan.
Yeah.
I was happy to see on your wall, on the 2047 map, there are 4 points. Plans. You have to plan ahead. And maybe today it's not working, but we are at that point, just build those ports, let them close, but they're ready the day the sky turns bright. You're ready. You don't have to start building them, which takes 5-10 years to build things.
And I just want to kind of supplement, what Tino is saying, and this is for all my ICP managers also. You please be mindful of these things. Number one, you plan for the future. What we are going to do now, what we are doing now, is for the next 20, 25, 30 years. तो आप ये सोचिए कि अगर अभी ट्रेड है, सब with logistics it's always a chicken and egg situation. अगर प्रॉफिटेबल होता ट्रेड, इतना बिजनेस होता, इतनी आवाजाही होती, ट्रांजिट होता, प्राइवेट सेक्टर would have stepped in. There would have been pressure from business, from trade, from the industry to open up. Here the government is having to take intervention because you don't have that critical mass which would put pressure for private intervention. So we have to create that capacity, number one. Number two, in areas, and this is a global experience also, that areas where there is population, there is some economic activity happening, provision of logistics facilities creates its own demand. आप point A to point B सड़क बना दीजिए, अपने आप वहाँ पे आवाजाही शुरू हो जाती है. If you look at any any town in India, आप देखिएगा कि रेलवे स्टेशन के आसपास के एरिया बड़ा कंजेस्टेड होता है, जबकि स्टेशन की प्लानिंग हमेशा शहर के थोड़ी बाहर ही होती है. होता क्या है कि स्टेशन बन जाता है and the city develops around it. So this is exactly, the same logic applies to your ICPs also. So what Tino mentioned about what is happening on Myanmar-Thailand border is exactly that. You have to plan for the future. You never know कब trade बढ़े कब क्या, और these are not very big investment. The best thing about land ports is this, that compared to the big ticket investment that is required in physical infrastructure for roads, for ports, even in inland waterways and airports, we are doing a very minuscule percentage of that. And Gupta ji, answering your question about Thailand and Myanmar, you see वो जो part से deal कर रहा है Thailand and Myanmar वाला border, वहाँ पे relatively insurgency कम है. It is that Irrawaddy Plains वाला जो area है, which is hardcore Burmese, the ethnic Burmese, that area is not only prosperous, those people are trained, that is relatively quiet. Unfortunately, our border is a border which is turbulent because of a whole lot of issues. Now, can I ask a question? Yeah, I had a lot of questions, in fact, from Riya and from Tino, both of you.
But I'm glad you asked that question, because you are looking also, why is it good elsewhere?
Yeah.
And that's a very important question.
Yeah, I need to answer.
That's why we can't also invent things here only. Things have worked for 50 years elsewhere. It's a very important question, like how are they doing this? And you wouldn't think of Thailand as a big economic border, but they have. Many countries have solutions. And I think the more maybe exchanges also can happen between Land Ports Authority of India and various places around the world. We go around and understand a little bit what has worked for them or not. Doesn't mean we want to import their solutions, but adapt a little bit and exchange practices. So more this international cooperation is very important, not only within the region, but with the world. Africa, in fact. Many solutions are in Africa. You'll be surprised. Western Africa is more advanced sometimes cross-border management than parts of India and South Asia. So very important to look at Thailand, why has it worked? And I think the more we go there and study their experiences, the more we have answers for your important question.
So my question actually, Riya, was about our trade with Myanmar, and I just wanted to understand what is exactly the quantum of land trade between Myanmar and China. Now there are two things. There is a lot of Chinese state intervention that is happening. You talked about the Myanmar-China economic corridor and a whole lot of things happening there. Then there is insurgency that is going on, and there are certain insurgent groups there, especially the United Vast State Army and everything, which are very, completely aligned with China. So in that backdrop of insurgency, uncertainty, and the potential, and the Chinese need for resources, especially the raw materials and timber and everything, what is the quantum of trade? That is part one. So that's the factual. The second is more on the opinion side. I wanted to understand, is it really worthwhile? I mean, the kind of geopolitical dislocations and the volatility and the turbulence that we are seeing, should we be preparing for some sort of land trade across the border with China, not via Tibet, not via the old, the trade routes via Tibet, but also the old Stilwell Road or whatever through to Yunnan. In fact, Yunnan is closer perhaps to the northeast and even, I believe, the Kolkata, right? So, is that can that fructify some sort of a land connectivity? Viably?
These are two very challenging questions.
Sorry, but that was.
I mean, I would know the exact quantum of trade that's taking place, but as part of the China-Myanmar economic corridor, because China needs access to the Indian Ocean region, they have identified corridors, including a seaport, through which, and we were talking about 20-year plan. China actually has developed as part of CMEC a 20-year plan on how it's going to utilize Myanmar through this economic corridor for trade. Now this plan was originally with India in the form of the BCIM corridor, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridor. But because of the nature of our relations with China, that is not going forward anymore. So this is something that does worry India. India has Sittwe port, but China also has another port leading to the Indian Ocean region. I'm not sure about exact numbers of the China-Myanmar land trade, but it is in China's plans for the next few years as part of the BRI.
Another great question. Excellent question. I think it was two. One is, the yes answer is, if you think about a wealthy India, which we all want, we need to trade with the rest of the world. The rest of the world is around India, a lot of it. 30% of the world population is what? 3-4 hours flight from India, from Delhi. China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, 8th largest country in the world. So, therefore, the answer is yes, you need to prepare for whichever that sunny day is where India and China will want to trade over land. So, that's a broad answer, which answers also even the Myanmar question. If you want to connect with China, that is not only direct. I mean, look at the Natula, for example, experience in the 2000s. That is also indirect via Nepal. The Chinese have been pushing for this Trans-Himalayan economic corridor. They're thinking about this. They're pushing it all the time, saying Nepal will be the hub between China and India. That means also third country. Maybe one day, I think many of us in this room will see the day, might see the good chances, of Bhutan connecting directly with China, having a checkpoint and active trade. So if that's happening, then you'll have the same experience you're already having with Nepal, which the Chinese are dumping products, trading with Nepal, and therefore that has implications for India. That will happen with Bhutan. We have to be prepared for that. And same, third country, Myanmar. There will be the day where what used to be for hundreds of years, thousands of years,
Exactly.
India and China trading and having economic linkages, and China is a big word for Yunnan, as you rightly said, the provinces of southern and southwestern China will gravitate to this growth hub here in India. Right? It will be a huge event. So that's the long vision. Right? So therefore, we have to be prepared for that. Leave the politics and security side, but there will be possible scenarios. But my second point is, why do we have to think too much about that? That's now my at least skeptical. It's not about China being a threat or Pakistan being a threat today. There's so much to be done here, this side. Right? I mean, there's so much to be done within India. Now, whether we do the land port 10 kilometers to the east or to the west, whether it's going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, we need to do all efforts to populate India's borderlands with infrastructure connectivity. I want that map in the office to flourish and become reality sooner rather than later. I want maybe not only 4 dots on the Pakistan border, there are 4 there. There should be maybe 10 or 12. I'd like to see, I think there's none on China on those maps.
No, there are a couple.
Yeah, how many?
There are a couple.
For 2047?
2 or 3.
2 or 3. I'd like to see 10 or 15.
Archula and Archula to Nepal. Shipkira and Archula. I mean, there are.
Yeah, 1 or 2, yeah. I'd like to see 10 or 15. That's my vision. I know it's not. You can do both things. You can even deal with China and say we will not do it 5 years from now, but you start planning. And maybe they will not be working. But then exactly what you said, what are the costs of this? With the larger vision of a developed growth agenda of India, What is the cost of each ICP?
200 to 400 crores.
That is nothing compared
Exactly,
to
that's
what
what I keep telling
the
you.
economy, what the
Yeah.
4, 5, 6 trillion economy will be for India. Nothing. Given the benefits that could arise. So even if half of these ICPs become operational in China, if the political and security conditions allow for it, that will be huge. And half of them will lay vacant, gathering dust. That is the vision we need. That's the implementation. That's what makes these, what I was saying, critical. So that's my slightly no answer. Don't worry so much about connecting corridors through Myanmar, security, etc. The northeast region of India, if we can have many more of these ICPs across Arunachal, Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram, let naturally, like you said, also business interests start thinking differently. You have the roads, you have the railways, you have the power, you have the checkpoints there. Business people, the industry will follow and will start thinking, well, this is a viable opportunity, and naturally, also the trade exists, last point I want to make. We mentioned about the benefits of this. We forget that there's benefits to formal trade. There's a lot of informal trade happening on the Yemen border. There's a lot of informal trade happening with India and Pakistan. The more we formalize this, the less there will be those non-state security actors that benefit. You are taking their oxygen away, right? By formalizing trade, making it safe, secure, predictable for your business and industry people, for your local stakeholders. So by doing that, there's also a net security benefit by formalizing trade, because you are dismantling not only security threats, but illegal, nepotist, truckers, tariffs, parking grounds, taxation, parallel taxation that is happening today, that is delayed. Because business people do not like that. They don't like to be taxed by 10 different insurgent groups. They prefer to be taxed more by 2 predictable state governments.
Thank you, Dr. Xavier and Madam Riya Sinha, for your insightful lecture and thoughtful responses. As we draw to the close, I invite Jayan Singh Sir, Chairman LPAI, to present a simple sapling and memento to our speakers as a token of our appreciation.